What if the first time you met your estranged dad, a flesh-eating monster showed up too? Welcome to one of the weirdest, creepiest, and most offbeat horror comedy thrillers you've probably never heard of. This is the recap of the movie Chompy and the Girls, a low-budget gem that blends awkward family reunions, dark humor, and surreal horror into one wild ride. Let's enjoy the story.
Come back! What?
You got lucky.
Chompy?
The story follows Jackson, a 24-year-old woman who was drowning in mental anguish and loneliness. Her life feels meaningless, and she has reached a breaking point. One day, she ties a rope to her ceiling fan, intending to end it all. But before she could execute her plans, the fan crashes instead of holding her weight, and this leaves her standing, alive, frustrated, and still in despair. Meanwhile, in another town, Sam Gladwell returns home to his cold and distant wife. Deborah barely listens to anything he says, and she constantly brushes him off when he tries to talk. She eventually snaps at some point and tells Sam that his constant talking is distracting her from work. Though hurt by her words, Sam quietly accepts it and shifts his focus to a parcel he has just received. Inside it, he finds a pair of cowboy boots that clearly don't suit him, yet he puts them on anyway. Back at Jackson's apartment, her situation isn't any better. With the ceiling fan destroyed and her emotional state worse off, she desperately seeks for someone to talk to. When she calls her mother, she is met with rejection. So, she tries to contact Tony, her dealer, in an attempt to make casual plans. But Tony reminds her about a chapel party that night and declines her invitation to hang out. He even makes it clear to her that they're not close like that. Feeling all alone again, Jackson collapses on the floor and cries out her frustration. Elsewhere, Sam is trying to hold things together at home as he brings home sandwiches for dinner. He had thought that it was a thoughtful gesture, only to be criticized by his wife. Apparently, she doesn't consider sandwiches to be real dinner. Hurt again by her coldness, Sam accepts the blame without complaining. Suddenly, he receives a text from an unknown number. The sender is a woman named Addie Jackson, and she claims to be his daughter. At first, Sam dismisses it as a mistake. But then the name Clarice Jackson comes up, a college girlfriend he dated for a year. Slowly, the truth begins to sink in. Curious and at the same time conflicted about the situation, Sam agrees to meet the young woman in the park. So, he quickly puts on his awkward cowboy boots despite Deborah laughing at him and goes to meet with his supposed daughter. When he arrives, Jackson is already waiting. They chat briefly as they try to ease into the tension, until Sam suddenly pulls away emotionally. He says everything feels too sudden, but Jackson insists she doesn't expect a father figure or a place to stay, she just wants to be recognized. But even that seems too much for Sam. Just as they're about to part ways, something unthinkable happens. Across the park, they see a man with a strangely large mouth devouring a girl alive. It was a weird, horrifying sight that was over in seconds. Then the man suddenly turns and starts walking toward them. Fully terrified, both Sam and Jackson flee in their separate cars. Later that night, Sam is still haunted by the incident with his mind spinning, while Jackson, who is trying to make sense of their encounter, browses the internet for any trace of the bizarre man. With 2 cigarettes hanging from her lips, she searches intently but finds nothing. Then, there was a sudden knock at her door. She tries to steel herself and proceeds to open it, but she finds no one there. Thinking the danger is behind her, Jackson returns to her computer, only for the man from the park to suddenly break into her house. His jaws were widely loose, revealing his impossibly large mouth. Seeing this, Jackson scrambles to grab a broom as she tries to defend herself, however her attempts didn't cause any damage to the man. When she realizes that she is not a match for the monster, she flees the house and runs straight to Sam's place. She enters the house without warning as she finds Sam eating snacks. He is startled by her presence, but Jackson immediately goes into a frantic explanation, telling him that they would need to leave or they would risk getting devoured too. Sam, who was confused and skeptical, refuses to go, and as the two shout at each other, their argument wakes Deborah up. On seeing Jackson, she immediately assumes that she is Sam's mistress. However, the misunderstanding is quickly cleared up when Jackson introduces herself as Sam's daughter, and this revelation shocks Deborah to her root. Despite Jackson's pleas, Sam still refuses to leave, until she grabs a knife and threatens him. In a half-hearted defense, Sam throws a tiny butter knife at her, which bounces off harmlessly. With no other option, Jackson forces him to put on his shoes. Just then, Deborah glances out the window and spots the man with the gaping mouth approaching their home. That's all it took for Sam to finally agree to leave, not for himself, but in order to protect his wife. Before they left, Deborah bizarrely insists Sam wear a ridiculous beanie for the cold. Moments later, Jackson and Sam enter the car and drive toward the chapel party where Lotus is. On the way, she explains to Sam that Lotus is into the paranormal and might know what kind of creature they're dealing with. During the drive, Sam receives a call from Deborah. However, Jackson warns him not to answer, fearing it might give away their location. When Sam ignores the call, Deborah grows worried and leaves him a voicemail asking about his whereabouts. Later on, Sam secretly texts her and gives her their location, and this immediately makes Deborah head after them. They arrive at the chapel, only to find it was actually a wild party filled with drugs, alcohol, and strange behaviors. They manage to wade through the chaos and finally locate Lotus. Jackson tells him about their situation, and Lotus instantly assumes it's the little girl from earlier and identifies the entity as a Rixella, an interdimensional parasite. But Jackson corrects him, telling him that it is not the girl but rather, it's a man with an enormous mouth. Before she can explain further, Lotus gets distracted by a guy attempting to spike a girl's drink. He immediately acts on impulse and he drinks from the tainted cup himself to save the girl. However, he quickly became intoxicated and eventually useless to Jackson and Sam. Things escalate when Lotus confronts the spiker and ends up getting punched. Fueled by the substances and adrenaline, Lotus bites the guy's leg and this triggers a chaotic brawl. In the end, Sam and Jackson manage to drag him out of the mess and decide to take him back to his place. On their way to drop him off, they spot the same little girl from the park, the one who started it all, and they immediately rush toward her, sensing she might be the key to unraveling the terrifying mystery. When they reached the girl, she appeared to be frightened and confused. However, Jackson aggressively bombards her with questions while Sam takes a much softer approach. Gradually, they discover her name was Birch, and they also learn that she's looking for her parents. Just as the conversation begins to take a calm turn, the terrifying man whom they now call Chompy suddenly appears and starts heading toward them. Alarmed, they quickly pull Birch into their car and speed off. They drove to Lotus' house in an attempt to find a safe place to hide. Upon arrival, Jackson sneaks away and secretly uses some drugs. But Sam catches her in the act and immediately throws away the stash, an act that leaves Jackson frustrated. Later, as they prepare to enter the house, Birch resists, refusing to leave the vehicle. So, Sam is forced to lift her up and carry her inside. Inside the house, Jackson tries to put Lotus to sleep and then browses one of his books, hoping to find answers about Chompy. But the moment she steps out of the room, she's met with a terrifying sight as she finds Birch hovering over Sam, who is lying on the floor with wide eyes and a frozen expression. Seeing that she's been caught, Birch immediately runs from the room, while Jackson rushes to Sam's side, tapping his face in an attempt to wake him. Just as she begins to fear the worst, Sam gasps back to life, both shocking and relieving her at the same time. Soon after, Jackson starts to think that Birch might be the creature known as Rixella. However, when Sam tries to move, he suddenly collapses and, upon removing his boot, they discover in horror that his foot has shrunk to the size of a baby's. Panicked and overwhelmed, he starts screaming, while Jackson tries to hide her laughter by stuffing a crumpled paper into his shoe to fill the gap. Getting overwhelmed, Sam decides to return back home to Deborah. However, Jackson protests as she warns him that leaving won't fix anything. His foot won't return to normal, and Chompy will still come for him. In all of these, Jackson realizes that Sam's real motive wasn't that he was just running from danger, but rather, he was running from their strained father-daughter relationship. Heartbroken by this, Jackson tries to storm out of the house, only to find Chompy standing outside the door. With no other option, Sam goes out to confront him as Jackson hides behind Sam. Outside, Sam explains everything to Chompy as he tells him about Birch's attack, the transformation of his foot, but Chompy remains silent and continues to stare blankly at them. Jackson takes a bold step forward, and then asks if he needs their help. In response, Chompy grins, then he kneels, and opens his wide mouth and gestures for them to enter. Surprisingly, Jackson complies and dives right in. With no choice, Sam follows. Inside, they discover a strange new dimension. As they explore, a voice greets them and identifies itself as Talon. The voice is unable to communicate physically, so it has brought them into another dimension to reveal the truth to them. Talon is hunting Rixella, which is the very same Birch, who now seeks to assimilate all humans into clones of herself. This would explain Sam's partially assimilated foot, which Talon describes as an effect of an interrupted transformation. In the meantime, Talon tells them his plan. He will consume all the assimilated victims through Chompy, heal them, and by doing so, eradicate the parasitic Rixella in the process. However, he warns Sam and Jackson that if anyone learns about his existence, the mission will be at risk. The two agree to keep everything secret and exit the strange dimension with a sense of peace. Outside, they share a laugh, relieved to have finally found the truth. Chompy, unable to speak but visibly emotional, sheds tears of joy and he soon walks, seemingly to complete the task ahead. But tragedy strikes again. As Deborah was approaching Lotus's house, she collided with something on the road and to everyone's horror, it was Chompy. Jackson immediately becomes furious and yells at her. When she finally calms herself down, the three drag Chompy's body into the house. With no clue what to do next, they pile inside the car, and Jackson drives them to Peter's Pancakes to grab something to eat. At the diner, Jackson breaks out in frustration, deliberately creating a mess with syrup on the table to annoy Sam and Deborah. When the waitress notices this, she is forced to ask them to leave before things escalate. With no other leads on what to do next, they head off in search of Birch, guided by Sam's little foot, which can somehow now sense the way to Birch. Eventually, they found Birch, but it was not just one. They saw multiple versions of her, and Jackson managed to capture one of them. With Deborah's help, they shove Birch into the trunk. However, a man standing nearby witnesses this, but Jackson chases him off before he can call the police. Back in the car, Sam and Deborah begin discussing the strain in their relationship, and their conversations eventually lead to the possibility of divorce. Jackson, who was driving, pretends not to hear anything. Eventually, they arrive at Jackson's house. They take Birch inside and tie her up, but no one realizes that she was telepathically summoning her clones. Soon, the house is surrounded by the other replications, forcing the group to block the doors and keep them from breaking in. During this chaos, Jackson receives a call from Lotus. He tells her that he found Chompy's body but can't reach her house due to the swarm of Birch clones outside. At that point, they start to suspect that Chompy's mouth might still be a functioning portal, and if so, tossing the clones inside could neutralize their threat. Suddenly, Sam notices that Deborah is missing. When he eventually finds her, she's unconscious, and he sees that Birch was beginning to assimilate her. Sam manages to fight off the clone and carries Deborah to the bathroom to get temporary safety for them. Meanwhile, Jackson, who eventually fought her way through the clones, takes it upon herself to manually throw the replications into Chompy's mouth. During the process, Jackson eventually gets pulled into the mouth as well. Inside, she finds the real Birch. She confesses that an external force is compelling her actions, controlling her against her will and transforming others into versions of herself. In an act of sacrifice to help the girl, Jackson offers to take the burden from Birch. When the young girl resists, Jackson embraces her, allowing the Rixella to transfer into her own body. With the parasite inside her, Jackson orders Birch to escape while she summons the replications, who were dozens of assimilated humans, to begin entering Chompy's mouth. One by one, they are purified and healed through the portal. Among them is Sam, who has also been transformed. But inside, he discovers Jackson suffering in agony as the Rixella takes its toll on her. Sam was moved by her pain and he intervenes, pulling the parasite out of her and freeing her from its control. Though weak, Jackson felt an immense relief. Now finding that they are trapped inside the portal, their escape seems impossible. However, Lotus notices this and throws down a rope to pull them to safety. Back in the real world, those affected are restored to normal, and Birch is finally reunited with her family. Meanwhile, Deborah and Sam move forward with their plans to divorce. Jackson apologizes to the two and also admits that she needs help. This honest moment leads to healing for them, and she finally calls Sam her father, marking the beginning of a growing relationship and the end of their harrowing journey. And that was the story of Chompy and the Girls, a movie which might not have the budget of a blockbuster, but it sure leaves a mark. If you enjoy this recap, don't forget to like, subscribe, and let me know in the comments, would you run from Chompy, or try to reason with him? See you in our next recap.